Welcome, BCI pastors and church leaders, to this edition of the Discipleship Roadtrip. We are so pleased to be joined today by Pastor Tim Kimberley here in Collins, Iowa. And man, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Oh,
thank you,
man,
Chris.
what a blast. And before we get into everything, I'm wondering if you'd just do us a favor. This is a magnificent property here.
Thank you.
Thanks for showing us around a little bit earlier, but did I hear right that your family came here in like the 1850s?
Yeah.
Was that
Yeah.
1850s?
Yeah.
Bring us up to speed.
Yeah. So strangely enough, Collins is about 3 miles that way, gravel roads and stuff, but just on the other side of a bean field right here. In about 1850, my family first moved here. And the idea was they were actually into gold, and they had gone to California to the gold stuff there, which you know better than me, all that stuff. But then they heard that there was gold in Australia. So my forefather and his best friend went from California to Australia, and they found gold at both places, I guess. And I haven't received any of this, by the way.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, is that why you have the safe out there?
There's no stash anywhere that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right.
But then they heard that there was gold in Iowa. They called it black gold, and it was the soil. So they talked about moving here for the black gold, the soil of rural Iowa. So
boy, they hit the nail on the head with that, didn't they?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. The crops in the fields around here have been way more productive than a gold mine.
I would
that
think
runs
so.
out. This is year after year after year. So you grew up right here.
I actually grew up in this house.
Yeah. Oh, in this very house.
In this very house. Yep. I had the unique opportunity of buying this house from my parents when we moved back to plant the church. So.
They charge you double?
No. Well, my dad says that I kicked him out of the house, and which I did, but he went willingly, and they actually live next door now.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. And so you've had a ministry trajectory that's taken you to a couple of different places.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. Just give us the Cliff Notes version, so people understand, your nomadic lifestyle and how you don't like. No, I'm kidding. Just a little bit about your background there.
Yeah, I grew up here thinking that I would just live here the rest of my life, and I got really into technology. So I graduated high school in 1996, which was the same year that the Netscape Navigator came out, which was the first web browser. So I was all in on multiple levels. And so I went to UNI with the idea of working as a computer guy for the rest of my life. And I got a job for John Deere as a computer programmer and loved it. I was doing that my sophomore year of college. That's what I was going to do for the rest of my life. Then I was on the rugby team in college, and I met Jesus, and he pursued me. And I was the first person in my family to give my life to Jesus, which was quite an amazing experience. And seeing them all come to Jesus now has been incredible. But so my plan did not include anything connected to Jesus. Then he radically changed my life, and I just lost all passion for computers and all that stuff. I'd skip class to read my Bible, which was very much not like me, but I kind of thought I was the first Christian, because I'd kind of grown up around a cultural Christianity. And I was like, no, I actually know him now. And it was through a lot of my sin, and he freed me from that. And the burden felt lifted. And so I just started growing a lot and losing all desire for computer stuff and all those things. And that took me out of the state to go to seminary. And I just I think I want to spend the rest of my life just preaching the Bible, telling people about Jesus. And so I left Iowa 23 years ago thinking that I would be right back. And it ended up being 19 years that it took me to come back. So after seminary, we were part of a church planting team to Portland, Oregon, and we're there for a while. Then from there, we moved to Oklahoma City to be a part of a ministry there. We thought we were trying to decide at that time, should we come to Iowa or go to Oklahoma City? And we were like, let's go to Oklahoma City for 1 year. And we were there for 10 years. But the Lord was doing a lot of stuff. And so for 20 years, I was a very proud Iowan that was far from home. And there was a lot of things that were happening in my heart, I think, too. I think that when I left Iowa, I think what I was thinking, I would have never told you this, but I think there was things working behind me that were like, God does big things in big places. and he does little things in little places. So I'm going to go to the big city. I'm going to see God do big things. And and he does do big things in big places. But a shift that God really started doing in me was convincing me that he does do big things in big places, and he does huge things in little places as well. And so I was preaching my grandmother's funeral in 2016 in Collins at the Methodist church in town that I grew up in. And while I was preaching her funeral, it was just like, both for my wife and I felt just a supernatural call of God to say, like, to call us back here. And I had this feeling that it's like, I think a lot of the people I know, number one, don't even know this place exists, but also would not think of it as being where they'd want to be called. And for me, I was like, this would be a dream come true. There's like nowhere else on planet Earth that I'd rather Jesus call me back to for the rest of my life. And so, yeah, now it doesn't mean it's not full of all sorts of, it's also the closest to hell I ever want to live as well.
Sometimes there's a misnomer about this idea of where Jesus calls me, it's going to be easy. Yeah. And of course, we don't read that in scripture, but almost anywhere in scripture, probably. But why do you think that might be, like in the life of a pastor or church leader?
Man, I just think it's our flesh. I think we're all born, or it feels like our default is the prosperity gospel. It's kind of like, if I'm really walking with Jesus, I'm going to see everything's going to be up and to the right all the time. And, it's just like he tells Paul, or he tells the person he wants to tell Paul, like, I'm going to show him how much he must suffer for my name's sake, and so, like, it's just not the way of Jesus is to always lead us to ease. But I think that's our, the old man tells us that like a good God would only give us good, pleasurable things. And I feel like I wake up that way every morning and have to be discipled in a different direction.
Well, probably in your life and in mine, for sure, I've had some ministry positions or seasons, would probably be a better way to say it, where it seemed like things were up and to the right. Yeah. And then I've had others where it's like, oh my goodness, this is so difficult.
Yes.
And the calling, the reason I mentioned that, Tim, is you mentioned calling, and how important is your calling, no matter which side of that equation you're on, or maybe up and to the right, or down and to the left, or in the middle.
Yeah.
Talk to me about calling and what that's done in your life, to be sure of that calling in whichever season you were in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know how everybody thinks about calling. I know that there are some people that have a very strong, like, I'm called to be the lead pastor of a church or something, they would talk about calling in a very specific, like job description way, almost to say, like, hey, I'm called to, because I've even bumped into people who are like, I'm called to be a church planter. And then I spend a lot of time around them and I'm like, I don't affirm that because I just, and it's like that can be a struggle, and like, I know that I'm called to follow him. Like when Jesus says, like, follow me, like that to me is calling. Like the most foundational calling is follow me. Now, do I feel called to be lead pastor of Sacred Mission Church? Yes. Do I feel, but I think, like, sometimes those callings can come and go, or like, it's like, okay, I know you aspire to this, and you feel called to this particular ministry role. And I think the church, the body of Christ, affirms all of that stuff. So sometimes people might come in saying, like, I feel really called to be, the worship director. And then you get them up and they start singing and you're like, I don't think that's your calling, but what they might be feeling inside of them is a calling towards Jesus. And for whatever reason, their experience says that must be in this form. And I think they learn over time that it's like, hey, I thought this is what I'm called to be all in with Jesus. And so for me, I think it's like, if I have a death grip on, I know God's called me to drive this car and live in this house and pastor this church that will look this way, and everything has to be like this. Well, then you have this death grip on stuff where I think in times of when things get hard, you're like, well, this isn't the vision I have, We might
take a U-turn at the wrong time.
Or give up, think like, well, God must not be behind this. He must not have called me to this, because if he did call me to this, it would be awesome, or whatever. Okay. But I think if it's like, hey, I know that he's called me to follow him. And I believe this is what, I know the vertical calling that he has, for the vertical and how that gets lived out horizontally, I think can ebb and flow and stuff. But so when times, I've had the hardest probably year of my life this last year is, moving back here, I was planting a church, all this stuff. And then my wife getting very sick and having tons of chronic pain and passing away less than a year ago. And being like, man, I've cried more in the last year than I have probably the rest of my life combined. Mm-hmm. I'm fired up about what Jesus is doing and stuff. And man, if I was going to write my story, I'd write a different story than I'm living right now. And there are a lot of things I'm super excited about and grateful for. And the call is to follow him. My eyes are on him more than my circumstances, which actually allow me to appropriately walk in my circumstances, whether I'm singing on the hilltop and high-fiving people or on my knees in the valley.
Yeah. Well, of course, you're bringing up the foundational piece of discipleship.
Yeah.
And that is following him, or what I like to call obedience.
Yeah.
However you want, obedience might not be the right cultural word. I like your word better. I think I would just start saying follow. But if we're going to follow, then that means that obedience is a factor.
Yes.
And so let's dive into discipleship.
Sorry, there's a fly that's
all right. Let's dive into discipleship as you see it. Not only in your own life as a follower, but also you're leading a group of people in a church that's got a sacred mission.
Yes.
And help us understand, first of all, what is discipleship to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
I'd start with an easy question,
I think even you asking that question proves it's not a simple answer. Right. If I was like, what's the color blue to you? You could say, well, I think it's the same as it is to you. But I think by you even asking that question, I think does show, so I think, because you could say, well, discipleship is giving you this new book that was just published. That's an awesome book. That's like 10 tips to be the best Christian dude, there mission accomplished. Discipleship has just happened. I gave you a book I just bought. So there's probably a lot of ways we could talk about that. So sometimes in the fog of war, which I think discipleship is in many ways, it's like, can I cling to things that I know, no matter what the cultural moment is, like, I know this is discipleship. And I think if I pare down as much as possible, what are we talking about when we're talking about discipleship? Because yes, this is like Jesus's parting words.
Yes. They might have a ring of not only importance, but direction as well. So anyway,
commands to obey.
To
obey. Go make disciples, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And then thankfully I'm with you always to the very end of the age. So discipleship is not my job in a vacuum. Thankfully, it's Jesus saying, knowing this is his heart. And for simplicity's sake, when Jesus says to love him with our heart, mind, soul, and strength, to me, that's the discipleship grid.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Heart, mind, soul, strength.
Yeah. Heart, mind, soul, and strength. So I think if I'm just like, hey, here's a book, here it is, it's going to teach you some great things. I might be hitting on 1/4 of what he's talking about. Maybe that's really good for your head,
Okay.
Your heart, mind, soul, and strength. So it's like, okay, heart, that's simply, all of these things we can dive into. And thankfully that's the beauty of his kingdom, is everything is a mountain that we can spend our entire lives climbing, Like it can be simply understood and it will never be exhausted. And that could discourage us, or it could get us out of bed every day and being like, hey, I'm never even close to approaching. None of us are close to arriving. The pursuit is worth it because following him is worth it. But it's like heart, mind, soul, and strength, heart, our affections. So like if I think about someone following Jesus, I think a lot of times we like it to be so clear that it's just like, well, tell me the books they've read. Let me interview them and see if they can win Bible trivia. And like, we're good. They're a great disciple of Jesus. But it's like, what are their affections? What are their passions? Where is their heart? Which, as a rural Iowan that's castrated pigs and all that stuff, I always joke that's like my affections and my heart, I tried to drive far away from me. So I didn't look like a little kid that was trying to act like a tough man working for farmers in the community and stuff. So I was trying not to cry as I was experiencing really traumatic things for like a 10-year-old to experience.
We got PTSD going on here.
Maybe, yeah.
I'm going to line you up. Well, not with me.
But
I have to line somebody up for you.
Well, so I'm just saying, like, I think it's hard for everybody, but it's stinking hard for me to love Jesus with my heart. Mm-hmm. To even know what my heart is, to even know what my heart feels like, and he's like, yeah, I want all of your heart and I want all your mind. So, and that part is easier. Like that comes more naturally to me. Okay. And it's, you can just compartmentalize. Okay. Jesus and me are good right here. all this stuff is a mystery to even me, but right here, Jesus and I are good. Right. So heart, mind, and then soul, man, I think that's like the deep part of you, like I've been around people who said like when people start speaking in metaphor, a lot of times they're kind of tapping into their soul level. If they're just like, hey, how's your day feel like? Feels like a dog chasing me, a wild dog chasing me down an alley. You're like, whoa. A lot of guys would just say good, had a good day. But if it's like, feels like a wild dog chasing me down an alley, I'm like, man, you went into an area that maybe you don't even know you're going into, that like you had to speak deeper than even your mind can connect to or whatever. And not trying to be too, in the clouds, but I think it's like, okay, Jesus wants all of that of our lives too: heart, mind, soul, and our strength, our actual time and our hands and where our feet are, and all of the place of what we put our strength to. Jesus is like, that's mine. And so like, what does it look like for us to love him with our heart, mind, soul, and strength? For me is like it's not the only thing, but there's a lot of things we could talk about. But I think in the midst of publishers sending you things, in the midst of, hearing things, in the midst of talking to people, in the midst of just living in community with people, I think if it's like, hey, let's keep the main thing, let's keep focused here. Like, what is the goal? And I think in this, what Jesus says, hey, I want you to make disciples. I would say like, okay, where are people at in loving Jesus with their heart, mind, soul, and strength? Okay,
so then that brings up a natural question to me of, especially with your ministry background and longevity, have you noticed that people in general are more adept at one of those 4 areas than maybe the other 3, or 2 of them they might have wired, but they might not have a clue about another. Talk to us about that as far as your experience working with and making disciples yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Lord willing, for all of us, it's like we want to hang with him as fast as he is moving, as fast as the Holy Spirit is moving. And I think it's helpful to be very, very patient as well. That, if these are people who are born again, who've been transferred the kingdom of darkness, the kingdom of light, they're inheriting, like all of the great things that we could speak of just a believer for just what they are.
Well, we have a home in
God's
heaven.
Eyes, on and on and on. Thankfully, we could go on and on. I think as like a shepherd, to be aware of all these things and to just realize like, hey, I think this person is in a really sweet spot of growing with loving God with their mind. And man, I don't know if they're ready to go into, of course they could, but like being patient to, I think sometimes in our discipleship efforts, we want a home run all the time. And sometimes like because of that, we're missing a bunch of little wins along the way and celebrating wins and being like, man, that you are more like Jesus now than you were a week ago. And I see it in this part of your life. And to know like, if they're ever like, good, so I'm good. I'm good to go to heaven, and I don't need to grow anymore. I'd be like, dude, you're at like base camp 1.
Yeah, right.
And it's not a
right.
ladder because we're all infants our entire life in some area of our Christian life, I think.
Well, what you're saying right now relates really well to me, because as a younger Christian, now I came to Christ on my 21st birthday. So later in life,
just a few years ago.
And I thought, thank you. Yeah, right. That's so full of baloney. I used to think you were a truth teller. No.
Yeah, not complete.
Oh, my goodness. But I used to think, and I don't know where I got this idea, probably from my background or upbringing, that, okay, well, now I know Jesus, and I knew Jesus, which was a great thing for me. And about 2-3 years, I'll be a baked Christian, like a loaf of bread or something. It's like you prepare it, you shoot it in the oven, it bakes for, what's it take, 40 minutes? I don't know how long you bake bread. And then it comes out, and then, okay, now, I couldn't be, like that was, of course, blown, that idea was blown apart. So, but this line of thinking makes me lead, this line of reasoning that you have with discipleship makes me want to ask the difference between a linear approach and a non-linear.
Yeah. Sounds
like you're very non-linear to me.
Well, in my experience, I have spent a lot of time in the linear approach.
Okay.
Give me a leadership pipeline, give me like steps and stuff. I do, and they're helpful. I think in the realm of discipleship, doing anything is helpful. So a lot of times we await we say not yet because we're awaiting putting the finishing, polishing touches on the perfect pipeline plan to turn it loose in the world and see everybody be fully formed, which that itself is beautiful and good too. And the effort is worth it. But I think it's like, I try to have us know that like everything counts, that even like sitting around a fire pit with a buddy and spending time together and getting into each other's lives and looking to Jesus together is beautiful discipleship. Like, that's, I think, more Jesus's style. Like Jesus didn't do a lot of classroom type teaching. He didn't have a real clear plan that he was showing to them. I mean, I think he had a really good plan.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that I try to do what I feel like is best for the actual individual people, and sometimes we do different things, like we're scheduling things. We have like this year leadership development thing that we're doing for raising up elders in our church. We have a general leadership stuff we do. We're starting a ladies leadership group and stuff. So I think we do stuff. It's not just like, hey, let's just be organic and just see what happens. We're continually trying to add some formality to things, but we would never, I feel like as a shepherd, I want to, like when I'm around farmers and stuff, they very rarely are like, hey, here's my very polished plan of how I get a sheep from like being born to being amazingly healthy. I think like what I would rather do as a shepherd is say like, by God's grace, me and the other leaders of our church have the tools and are pursuing Jesus in a way ourselves, and being vibrant ourselves, and being practitioners ourselves, that like if this sheep gets sick, we're not like, well, that was my plan, I don't have any other plan B. It's like, hey, we can take these sheep all sorts of different directions to get them to, not to the slaughter pen, but to get them to safely home.
All metaphors break apart at some point.
but to get them safely home, and so, yeah, I want to always be ready for like a formal, like, okay, yes, let's do the 6-week thing. Let's put that in. That will be a part of this season of our discipleship. But to never think like, therefore, I can kind of like step back.
Okay, let me bounce this off you and just get your reaction to it. I think this linear piece that we're talking about works really well for the mind side of what you're talking about.
Yes.
But it doesn't work very well with the heart side.
Yes.
Is that so? Talk to me about that.
The heart and the soul. You
heart and soul.
You could debate on whether we should even distinguish between those two.
In school or education or even learning concept, I have to know how to add, subtract, multiply, divide before I can do anything with algebra or geometry or, whatever. And I'm not trying to make the spiritual life to that, but that's very linear and helps my mind. Things that I can know. Jesus just didn't appear. There's this whole lineage. To him. And do you think it's a mistake to try to make the heart and soul side of discipleship very linear?
I think so, probably, because I think you stop kind of marveling at each individual person. I think in what they might need and where they're at. One thing we talk about a lot. I mean, I talk about from the pulpit a lot is just transformation.
Oh, okay.
So that just the idea of like, that I will stop. I believe I will stop being an effective leader if I stop being transformed. And I think changed lives change lives. And so if we are really, that's a good preacher line right there.
Somebody's going to use that in a message this week. So that's
my
right.
Name has nothing to do with that. That was whoever said they said that first. They didn't say it first. It was somebody else. Changed lives. And so even like a sermon, we are talking a lot in our church about, I think people get well applauded in our culture by the people who preach great mind-focused sermons. I'm going to really inform you. And I mean, my seminary background is church history, and I love all the details. I think I showed 2 photos of archaeological things this last Sunday. It's like I was geeking out in the book of Genesis on where Sarah's buried and the Ugaritic texts that were discovered, and how 3 out of 6 transactions in the Ugaritic world of the 13th century were for 400 shekels of silver. So a normal real estate transaction at the time of Abraham was 400 shekels of silver based on the Ugaritic text.
Okay.
And that is
so glad I know that.
That's what Abraham
will I
paid.
Remember that? I don't know.
But that's the amount Abraham paid for the cave of Machpelah.
Okay.
So that's interesting. And it's interesting to me. And if people leave the sermon saying, man, that's really interesting, really fascinating, thank you for that, like, that's good. But even that sermon, the goal is transformation for all of us in the room to be changed because Jesus is a part of why we're in the room. And because the Holy Spirit is why we're in the room. So I think that now you can say, well, my mind was changed because I learned something new. But I do think that for us to, because I think we're so diverse and Jesus just has such diversity that I want to have space in our discipleship for I think in the heart and the soul area, because a lot of times like that's a language that none of us speak very well.
Tim, thanks for letting me jump in here. I've been listening to the conversation and just kind of reflecting on what strikes me from that. I really love the paradigm that you brought of, thinking about discipleship as how do we love God with our heart, mind, soul, and strength. I appreciate that paradigm. Hearing you talk about how you see that in your ministry at Sacred Mission, I was thinking of 3 different things: simple, real, and hard. Those are kind of the things that sort of came across to me. One thing that I think of in ministry is the difficulty of being patient. You talked about how it requires patience. Really waiting for God's work to happen in someone's life. How do you balance that as a church leader when, you want to see that progress.
Yeah.
You want to experience progress in someone's life, in a disciple that you're discipling.
Mm-hmm.
How do you balance that? Just being patient, waiting on God's timing, and really desiring to see that kind of progress?
Man, that's a great question, which I know a lot of times people say that's a great question because I secretly have a great answer. And so I'm glad you set it up so I can spike it,
Perfect.
But that's not how I'm feeling. It's a great question. And man, I think prayer has to be a part of that. Not trying to just, I genuinely say that is because I think there are times when, my dad, we have a lot of trees on our property and we have a wood burning stove in our house that we predominantly use to heat our house. And so I cut down a lot of trees that are already dead, or I chainsaw a lot of stuff. And I remember this time that my dad we had this huge tree that if it fell the wrong way, it was going to fall on the house.
Okay.
And so my dad started cutting this tree, and then he put a tractor in front and he put this huge chain on the tree. And he said, Tim, you pull the tree. Mm-hmm. It's not going to fall on top of you because you'll keep driving. Pull the tree, and then as I'm cutting it, you'll pull it down.
Mm-hmm.
And so we start going, and then he stops and he runs over to me. He said, "Pull the tree," but he said, "If you pull it too hard," he said, "I've seen this happen multiple times. If you pull it too hard, the chain will snap, and then the tree will flip back, and it'll fall on the house."
Oh, wow.
So he said, pull it, but don't pull it too hard, And so I actually use that in my mind, and I say it once in a while. I actually have a picture of my dad in our house cutting down a tree that reminds me of that saying too, which is I think it's I've heard, someone, I think it was attributed to Spurgeon, but it's act as if it depends fully on you and pray as if it depends fully on God, and knowing it does.
Yeah.
But I think the way that I approach it is we're not sitting around, we're going for it. We're charging the hill. We're doing all of those things patiently.
Yeah.
I think patience doesn't lead to inaction. I think that's that hupomone, Paul's patient endurance.
Yeah.
I think is probably a good paradox is patient endurance, and so we are active, but I think patient gets to the heart. If we have patient hearts as we're in the midst of it, and we're going for it, we're pressing into each other's lives patiently, allows that space of this guy that just gave his life to Jesus, for 4 years we've been, and I know for some people, some churches for 40 years, you maybe have a person who's been coming to your church but this guy came basically most weeks when he wasn't hunting, and we patiently pursued him and probably asked him about giving his life to Jesus 50 or 60 times easily.
Oh, wow.
Met with him many times, and didn't ever tell him to leave or say hey man, now or never, give your life to Jesus now or don't come back. We never went down that road because it's we think Jesus is pursuing him, and let's just be patient and let's not grow tired of doing good things,
Yeah. That's interesting. That's a paradox, right? You talk about it as a paradox. I think
most things are a paradox.
Yeah. Another paradox I think that I was hearing in the conversation is, you're not opposed to adding formality, but it's with the understanding that that doesn't mean it's going to be easy or clear how to move forward or a clean process. You don't want the method to become the end in itself, and developing better methods to be the end result that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And that actually taps into something that I was a little bit convicted of when we were having kind of our discussion before the interview. You had said, our culture is really addicted to tips and tricks, and that's not really how discipleship is working. And that's when I crossed out the first question, which was, can you give us some tips and tricks for discipleship based on your experience?
Yeah.
So instead of tips and tricks, really, I wonder if you could give an exhortation and an encouragement to other church leaders who are out there. How do you live out and how do you embody making disciples?
I think for church leaders specifically, maybe pastors or elders specifically, I would encourage people to not do it alone. So, because I think that there's great, even as this is a stimulating conversation, to be around other church leaders and to have opportunities to be around other church leaders and to lock arms together, and to be able to, because the goal is not like just the method, right? The goal is the thing, and the methods come and go. The methods change. We're working off of a handful of methods at any given time, and different people are doing different things. But when I'm around other leaders that I know are pursuing the same thing, have the same heart, and not, my goal is not like, hey, my goal might be like, hey, tell me about you, tell me where you're at, tell me, what Jesus is up to in your church and stuff. And then seeing the way that they're stepping into this, and then maybe having a conversation about ways that we're stepping into it. And it's not to share methods, but it's actually to have that relationship with other people that we're pursuing the same thing. We're locking arms together, and maybe even then for churches to have those relationships. There's such affection in the book of Acts for churches among each other, because I think they were in the pursuit of this. They were being transformed. They were seeing other people be transformed. So as like a rural guy, we meet in a town of 450 people. Like I have great value in being around other rural people, but like a guy like Cole Dykey in Des Moines, like him and me have very different contexts. Yeah. But he was at our church last Sunday, and we were able to really connect, and we've been texting each other. And I just know, like, hey, Cole, if you were called to my context, like, let's talk about that a little bit. What would you be thinking about? What would you be, how would you be? And I want to see through your heart and through you making progress with Jesus, and stuff. And so I think that and that might not make sense. It might just make sense to me, but I've such relationship among other leaders and other local bodies of believers, because what I'm convinced of is Jesus has led in my life and called me to be here with other people too. There are many people. I'm not the only person, like I'm a vast minority of what Jesus is doing in our church. And I don't have what I need to do what I'm being called to do. Like, I'm here, but I'm not here with what I need. I'm a very, like, I don't have the answer for everything. I'm here. I'm wanting to be used by him and how he leads me to be used by him. But like, it might be something that you say that sticks in me that I need for something I don't even know I need next week. And so to try to be really like open to the Spirit leading in those ways, to say like, I'm called to here, but the second that I think that I have what I need for here, I think it's like milk in the refrigerator that I never drink, and I just keep in there. Like, it's going to start stinking really fast, but if it keeps flowing, it's fresh. And I want us to be a community that's like, we're flowing in and out of other communities and stuff, because of the goal of what we're about is so eternally significant that we are so quick to embrace or let methods go. And I would just encourage other leaders, that if you're discouraged, like, that doesn't mean you failed. It probably means that you're in it. Yeah. And you care enough to be in it. And Jesus is using you in it. He loves you. He's crazy about you. He could have just left you and you wouldn't even know he exists, but you're in it. He's got you. And he's writing a beautiful story, and don't be discouraged if maybe, a certain method needs to be let go, and maybe it was the greatest idea you ever had. And he's like, yeah, we'll end that great idea that you ever had. I've had some of those where I was like, it was a gift when I finally realized like I need to let that idea go and be quick to embrace other things, because I need to keep holding on to the bigger picture.
So the last thing I want to get to, at least for today, I can talk to you for quite a bit longer. Very interesting. Good stuff. So let me just pause just real quick, talk to our BCI pastors and church leaders. Take a look at your own discipleship approach, like in the next 15 minutes, and just go, hey, which of these do I lean towards? My mind, my heart, my soul, and my strength. And don't try to pick it apart too much, just whatever those four terms mean to you. And just be cognizant maybe of that. And then, is there an adaptation that could be made that would give you, as a leader, a broader perspective a broader skill set, if I could use that term, on making disciples. So here's the last subject matter, and we could be 2 hours, but we won't be, I promise. So you and I have had some leadership conversations that have been healthy for me and even inspiring.
Healthy for me too.
Yeah. And I was just really curious about this idea of sometimes in a church, it seems to me, at least pastors I've worked with and stuff, we can interlace and get confused about making disciples and then developing leaders and think, well, if I'm developing leaders, I am making disciples. You know, can you speak into that a little bit and help parse that out, at least at some level?
Yeah.
If I'm not putting you on the spot too much.
No, I think for me personally too, 1 Timothy 4 has been really impactful for me. I'm old enough now, I need reading glasses. But, you know, I knew this, I feel like I knew this passage as a young man because I was young and I liked what it had to say. You know, command and teach these things. Let no one despise you for your youth. Set the believers an example in speech and conduct and love and faith and purity. Until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of scripture, to exhortation, to teaching. I mean, just if you look at this as like Paul teaching a pastor how to be a pastor, like it's a pretty good lens to look through, and people who really know each other. So until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of scripture, to exhortation, to teaching. Do not neglect the gift you have, which was given you by prophecy when the council of elders laid their hands on you. Practice these things, immerse yourself in them. And then there's a phrase, and then it says, keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching. Persist in this, for by so doing, you will save both yourself and your hearers. And that phrase I skipped has been the most impactful to me as a getting older man, practice these things, immerse yourself in them so that all may see your progress. And I just realized, even as like a guy that was a guy in ministry, what I would love is to show everybody the finished product. Just show up and be like, here I am.
Ta-da!
Yeah. But like this passage is like saying, hey, and it's leader to leader, Paul to Timothy, like, let them see your progress. And I feel like, so it's maybe a little different than the question you're asking, but I feel that has been the greatest challenge to me in 20 years of pastoral ministry, but in the last 5 years of this church plant, is I'm not the finished product. I'm not the savior of my community. I'm not like the hero that's returned. You know, I'm not living the Odyssey, you know, or any of these Greek things. You know, I am a person following Jesus that he's allowed me to take initiative for the benefit of other people, which that's my favorite like definition of leadership. Take initiative for the benefit of other people. Because a lot of people want to be the leader because they're the dominant personality that just has to be in charge if they're in a room. And it's okay to have a personality like that, but submitted to Jesus being the only somebody really in any room. But to actually take initiative for the benefit of other people, and a huge way you're doing that is letting people see your progress. So like you joked that you were going to ask me for like my greatest sin this week, but I was faced with a great temptation this week, and it was silly. But on Saturday we raised puppies, or we breed puppies as like the side hustle. We were holding puppies earlier before we sat down.
Yeah. I fell in love with one of them, but if I brought that little guy home, my wife would.
But so here's what happened though. Saturday morning, we had some people coming to pick up a puppy, and I made the mistake. 2 collars had fallen off of puppies, and I didn't know if collars had fallen off. I made the mistake of giving a puppy to a family that I gave them the wrong puppy. And another family had already put a deposit down for the puppy that I mistakenly gave. And the puppy is on the road to Florida. And everything inside of me wanted to just switch the collars. And so when the people came up to pick up this puppy, that I'm just like, hey, here's your puppy, you know? But I knew like I would be dishonest. And it's the silliest, has nothing to do with church leadership. But for about 24 hours, my plan was I'm just going to switch the collars, and I'm gonna hope that she's not more the girl who's actually my cousin, that she's not more observant than me, and that she wouldn't like be like, this isn't my puppy, where's my puppy, you know, and all this stuff. And so for about 24 hours I was there. And then I woke up at 3:30 in the morning the next day, just like my conscience just like on overdrive. I was redlining the RPMs of my conscience and stuff. And I was just like, this is not what I want to be. This is not what I want to do. This is not being me. Is my integrity worth the cost of 2 puppies? Even if both of these parties involved were like, oh, this is a sham dog breeding business. You guys are, this has never happened to us before. But I was just thinking of all the stuff that people could say. But then at the end of the day, I'm like, this is silly. Like, I'm putting my integrity, even though I could convince myself like, oh, I'm choosing a better dog for them and all this stuff. But so I had to send this message to this lady and just be like, hey, I want to just give you complete honesty. And I even told her I'd planned to try to deceive you. I had planned to try and just put the collar on, but I was like, I made a huge mistake. I'm so sorry. I know you guys have fallen in love with this yellow puppy. It has a yellow collar. And I can try and call these people in Florida and see if they'll drive back or all this stuff, you know? So make a long story short, she was just the most gracious. She's like, I really appreciate you being honest with me. This will be totally fine. I know they've fallen in love with that puppy. She's coming tomorrow morning to pick a new puppy.
Oh, okay.
But like, it was, you know, so when I think of like, I want to lead by example to say like, guys, I could have hid this from everybody in the world, but I couldn't hide this from God. I couldn't hide it from myself. I don't want my kids to like, I even if this ends up just being a big black eye for me personally, I'll take it, because like, I want to walk in the light with Jesus, and I want to look at other people around me and say, hey, let's walk in the light together. Like, you know, in this one area, would you follow me as I follow Jesus? I'm following you in other areas, like, because you are incredible at your heart with Jesus, and I want to learn from you, you know. And yes, God's called me in this role. He's called other leaders in our church into different places, and we have the opportunity to take initiative for the benefit of them. And a huge way that we're doing that is letting people see our progress as we are busted up, sinful people who are way more dependent on God than we realize. We're way more needy than we realize. And I think we have a lot more, like, he gives us so much more than we realize too. So it's like, I need him way more, and I'm learning what he supplies in my need more as well. Fantastic. And I'm wanting to grow in both of those, like, not just grow in embracing, you know, what I have in the spirit, but realize like I need to grow in realizing how, like, even as a lead pastor of a church, like all that, like at my best, I'm letting people see my progress. And if I start showing them a finished product, my discipleship has slowed down and I'm not being transformed. And so, but like with that, change lives. And so the leaders, I think, aren't the one. A lot of the leaders in our church are people who would not call themselves leaders, that we had to convince them. Because, you know, say like, I know you don't think you fit the mold as like this, like, you know, like platform stage speaker, but like, you are leading people and they're following you, and we want to like pour into you so you can keep pouring into them as you guys are all letting people see your progress.
Yeah, that's wonderful. You know, Tim, as you've been talking and, you know, these spirit-filled moments, we're 3 of us here, 2 or 3 are gathered, you know. I just, the phrases and language of John 15, 16, and 17 are just bombarding my mind. And then my heart is just really thankful that Jesus told us that he's got to go so that the Spirit can come and teach us all of these things. Doesn't mean just teach our mind these things, but mold and shape our heart, our soul, and motivate us, anoint us even for the job at hand. So,
and the job I find is harder than I ever realized. But and I think if our focus is on the job, it'll crush us. It'll wear us out. It'll get us to be like, man, I can't go to one more. I can't step into one more. You know, I think if we focus on the job, it'll. But if it's like, you know, what my hope is like, if I keep focusing on loving God, loving Jesus with my heart, mind, soul, and strength. My focus is staying on him, and then he can carry those things so that I can I can walk in. I can walk in the door, or I can walk with somebody as we're walking in through a door together, and know like, hey, we don't got this.
Mm-hmm.
If I think I got this, I'm going to walk out and feel like nothing happened, or worse yet, I might think that I just got this.
Yeah,
I just did it, But if it's like, hey, he's got this, let's go, because I know that he is pursuing them like he's pursuing me.
Well, Tim, thank you for sharing openly and transparently with us. And there you have it. Another example of how one of our BCI churches is being led in this pursuit of the main thing, which is make disciples. So Pastor Tim Kimberley here in Collins at Sacred Mission Church. You can look him up. I know he'll answer your email because he answered mine. So
within a month.
Within a month.
Within a
Okay.
month I'll answer.
Yeah, I'm going to put all this on you now. So there we have it.